At my son's wedding, I wore the lace my mother wore to mine. It still held the scent of cedar and lavender from the chest where I kept it all these years, like it was waiting for something sacred. I thought that day was it. I paid for the venue where the lights shimmered like stars, the towering cake with sugar roses, and the photographer who knew how to catch light in the quiet. I didn't ask for much, just a place in the memory I helped build. But just before the photo, when I took a single step forward, she turned. My daughter-in-law. Her smile didn't reach her eyes when she said, "Just the real family, please." My son said nothing. I stepped back, hands folded, chin up. They thought that was the end of it. But the frame they posed for never made it to the papers. It stayed buried in a folder, because the photo the world saw looked a little different. Thank you for being here and for taking a moment to listen to someone like me. I know there are countless stories you could be hearing right now, so the fact that you're here means more than you know. Tell me, where are you watching from? A quiet room? A familiar chair? Maybe somewhere you thought you'd never be alone in? If someone has ever made you feel invisible in a place you helped build, this story is for you. If you've ever stayed silent, just to keep peace, or smiled while being pushed aside, you're not the only one. I've felt that silence too, and if it's too much to share, just write, "I remember." That's enough. Sometimes being seen starts with saying nothing, and still being known. I was 28 when I held my son for the first time. His father had already passed by then, taken too young, too suddenly. It was just me and that tiny heartbeat in a quiet hospital room that smelled like bleach and hope. I named him Thomas, after his grandfather. He was my miracle, my reason, the first warm breath after all the cold. I raised him on a teacher's salary, stretched every dollar until it squeaked, and made holidays feel full even when the pantry wasn't. There were nights I'd come home with chalk on my sleeves and blisters in my shoes, only to find him asleep on the couch with his homework still open. I'd brush his hair back, kiss his forehead and whisper, "We're doing okay, aren't we?" I taught him how to tie his shoes, cook eggs without burning the pan, say thank you before he even understood what it meant. I taught him not to laugh at people who had less, and to offer help before it was asked for. He grew into someone kind, steady, with a strong back and a soft heart, or so I believed. Then he met Marcy. She walked into our lives with polished nails, the kind of confidence you don't question, and eyes that looked through you instead of at you. She was never rude, not in the way people write down. But she never called me Mom, never once, not even on the card she handed me one Christmas. Just signed her name neatly, like we were neighbors instead of family. Still, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe she just needed time, or maybe I needed to earn that place. Looking back, I realize I was already asking permission to stand in a house I helped build. It was a Sunday afternoon when he showed up at my door, shoulders slumped, keys still in his hand, like he wasn't sure whether to come in or turn back around. He looked tired. Not in the way work wears you down, but the kind of tired that sits behind the eyes when something's wrong. I put the kettle on before he even said a word, because sometimes a mother knows the wait before it's spoken. He sat down at the table, the same one where I once taught him fractions using slices of bread when we couldn't afford cake. He fiddled with the edge of a napkin and finally said it, almost like he was ashamed to need help. "Mom, we're over budget. The dress, the venue, the catering, it's more than we planned." I looked at him, this grown man I had once carried on my hip, and I said it without hesitation. Not to earn anything, not to bargain, just, "I've got you." I told him I'd take care of it, all of it, and I did. Quietly. I covered the venue deposit with what was left from my retirement savings, paid the bakery for that towering cake with sugared flowers, even gave the photographer his full rate up front so no one would be left waiting. I did it without telling anyone, without asking for recognition, or even a seat at the front. I wasn't trying to buy gratitude. I just wanted to be part of the joy, to feel like I was still woven into his life. Like all those years of sacrifice had brought us to a moment where I could finally sit back and say, "Look what we made it to." I thought that maybe giving this gift would help stitch something warmer between us, something lasting. I thought maybe that would be enough. The morning of the wedding came quiet, just the way I like it. No knocks on the door, no rush of bridesmaids or stylists, just the soft creak of the old floorboards and the hum of the kettle warming water. I had laid out the lace dress the night before, smoothing each fold like I was handling memory itself. It was my mother's. She wore it the day she married my father in a small-town church with cracked windows and wildflowers on the pews. She passed it to me the week before I got married, folded in tissue and tied with ribbon, and told me that love stitched by hand holds longer. I hadn't worn it in decades, but somehow it still held the faintest scent of lavender and thyme. Soft, honest, and untouched by the cold edges of the present. I didn't hire a makeup artist or call anyone to help. I pinned my hair myself, the same way I always had, steady fingers, silver strands tucked back with care. The mirror didn't flatter me, but it didn't lie either. I saw every line on my face and I earned each one. I added a touch of powder, a soft shade on the lips, and told myself today is for showing up. When I arrived at the venue, the air was bright, but oddly still, like everyone was trying a little too hard to smile. I greeted the coordinator with a warm nod, handed over the gift I had wrapped myself, and made my way through a few stiff hugs that felt more like formality than affection. There were no eyes lighting up when they saw me, no one rushing over to pull me into conversation or asking where I'd been. It wasn't cruel, just quiet. Cold in a way that doesn't come from the weather, but from people who don't know how to hold space for someone they think doesn't belong. I told myself they were just busy. It was a big day, full of details and nerves and photos and timelines. I gave them every excuse in my heart, hoping that somewhere before the cake was cut or the dancing began, someone would take my hand and say, "We're glad you're here." So I waited. I smiled. I kept my place at the edge of their celebration, hoping maybe the warmth I had poured into this day would find its way back to me. Just a little, just enough. The announcement came just after the cake had been sliced, when the laughter was still echoing near the tables and the music had softened to something delicate. The photographer raised his voice politely, asking for the full family to gather near the fountain. I stood from my seat, brushing a few crumbs from my dress, smoothing the lace over my knees. I took a deep breath and began walking toward them, not rushing, just steady. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular, only that it was time to take our place, to be part of what would hang in a frame or be passed around in holiday newsletters. I thought about how many times I'd taken photos of Thomas through the years, first day of school, graduation, birthdays, and now I was stepping into one where I could finally stand beside him, not just behind the camera. But before I even reached the group, Marcy turned, her hand resting lightly on Thomas's arm, her voice sweet but sharpened around the edges, and she said, "Just the real family, please." For a moment, it didn't register. I thought maybe she meant a smaller group. Maybe they were doing layered photos, one for each branch. But then I saw the photographer hesitate, glance in my direction, and then look away. No one moved. Not a single person said anything. My heart didn't drop right away. It was slower than that, like warm tea cooling in a cup. I looked at Thomas, my son, the boy I raised on bruised hands in prayer, and he didn't meet my eyes. He stared at the gravel like it had something more interesting to say. Not a word, not a gesture. Nothing. I stood there long enough to feel the air tighten around me. Then I took one step back, then another. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just folded my hands the same as that once buttoned his shirts and held his forehead when he was sick, and I stepped out of the frame. They arranged themselves in rows, smiling, fixing collars, laughing a little too hard at things I couldn't hear. And I watched it all like I was standing behind glass, part of the setting but not part of the scene. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was something quieter than that. I was aware of how far kindness can stretch before it tears, how silence can become its own kind of language. I stood off to the side, not defeated, not broken, just still. I didn't belong in their picture. But that didn't mean I didn't belong. It meant the picture was missing something, not me. When I got back to the hotel that night, the hallway felt longer than usual, like each step was asking me to think it over again, to replay what had happened from 100 different angles. The key slid into the door without a sound, and when it opened, I was met with the stillness of a room untouched. No laughter, no congratulations, Just silence, waiting. I closed the door behind me, not gently, not harshly, just firmly, like I was closing something I didn't want to carry with me anymore. I stood in the center of the room for a moment, staring at my reflection in the tall mirror near the closet. The lights above it buzzed slightly, flickering now and then, like they too were tired of pretending to shine. I reached for the zipper of the lace dress, the one that had been passed down like an heirloom, and slowly unfastened it. The fabric slipped off my shoulders and folded around my waist, falling soft to the floor. I left it there for a while, the hem brushing my ankles, as if the dress itself wasn't ready to let go. When I finally stepped out of it, I looked at myself in the mirror, and didn't see the woman who raised a boy with nothing but determination and love. I didn't see the woman who had sacrificed years of her life for the quiet comfort of others. I saw someone erased, softly but surely taken out of the frame, like she was never meant to be there in the first place. I sat at the edge of the bed, the room dim and still holding the warmth from the afternoon sun, and I reached for the small notepad the hotel left on the nightstand. I stared at the pages for a long while, not writing anything, just tracing the corner with my finger. Then I picked up the phone, not to cry, not to beg, but to correct something. I dialed the number printed at the bottom of the photographer's card, the same one I had paid in full weeks before. He answered on the second ring, cheerful, not knowing what had happened, just recognizing my voice. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't even explain much. I simply said, "You work for me." There was a pause, then a quiet, "Yes, ma'am." I nodded to myself, more for reassurance than anything else. "And I'd like to book one more shoot, not for the wedding, for me, my way." He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He said he'd be there next week, and when I hung up, I finally breathed like I had been holding my breath the whole day. I folded the lace dress gently, laid it across the foot of the bed, and whispered into the silence. They may have posed for a picture, but I'm about to show them what love really looks like. The morning light came in soft through the hotel curtains, but I didn't rise with the usual rhythm of habit. I sat still for a long time, the lace dress folded neatly across the chair beside me, the air holding that strange hush that follows a moment too big to process. My eyes felt heavy, not from tears, I hadn't cried, but from the weight of understanding. That kind of hurt doesn't come loud. It comes slow and deep, the way roots twist under a house, and you don't realize the cracks in the floor until you step on them barefoot. I was still sitting there, wrapped in a hotel robe and holding my second cup of tea, when the phone rang. It was Chloe. She didn't say hello the way people do when they're trying to be polite. She said my name like someone who had been holding it in all night. "Auntie," she said, her voice steady. I saw what happened. It wasn't right. There was no hesitation in her tone, no false comfort or quick excuses, just truth, plain and simple. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how, so I let the silence hold us for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you for noticing." And I meant it. Because sometimes, the worst part of being pushed aside isn't the act itself. It's when no one sees it happen, or worse, when they see and pretend they didn't. She went quiet, then said, "Do you still have the lace dress?" I looked at it draped across the chair like a memory that refused to be folded away. "I do," I told her. "Then let's wear it again. Let's do it right." It was her idea to make something new out of what they tried to erase. She offered to be in the photo with me, to help gather the ones who had always shown up, not out of obligation, not for appearance, but with real care. People who had sat at my table when I had little to give. People who brought soup when I was sick, who remembered my birthday without a Facebook reminder, who held my hand at funerals and danced with me in kitchens when the world felt kind. Chloe said, "Not everyone forgets who stood at the starting line." That line stayed with me. Because it was true. I had stood at the starting line, heart open, hands full, cheering them on even when they never turned to see if I was still clapping. But she remembered. And that memory was the difference between being alone and being unseen. Together we began to make a new plan. Not a replacement, not revenge, but a gathering of love that didn't need to explain itself. No expensive backdrop, no rehearsed smiles, just the truth in people's eyes and the kind of connection you don't fake. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about making something real, Not all love is blood, some love is built, choice by choice, visit by visit, cup by cup. And that love doesn't ask you to earn your place, it simply holds it for you until you're ready to come home. 1 week later, just as the afternoon light began to lean into that golden hour where everything looks softer, we gathered in my garden. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old wooden bench under the hibiscus bush, a few chairs borrowed from neighbors, and the smell of rosemary and soil that's been well tended over time. I wore the lace dress again. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because it felt like a thread I was pulling through the parts of my life that still mattered. This time, as I zipped it up, I didn't feel invisible. I felt steady, whole, seen. The photographer arrived early. He walked in quietly, carrying his bag over his shoulder, like he wasn't sure what this was going to be. But when he saw Chloe arranging flowers in an old mason jar, and my neighbor Delilah slicing lemon cake on the porch, I saw his shoulders drop just a little. He understood. This wasn't a job. This was something else. Chloe stood beside me in a soft green dress that fluttered in the breeze, the same one she wore to her graduation when I sat in the front row with a bouquet of sunflowers she didn't expect. My goddaughter, Lila, arrived carrying old photos and a tin of peppermint tea she still remembered I liked. One of my former students, now grown, now taller than I ever imagined, showed up with a framed picture of us from the year I retired, smiling like we had never left that classroom. And then, my late husband's brother. Quiet, faithful, never far, he came too, in a shirt I recognized from our last Thanksgiving together. These people weren't part of any official wedding party, but they had been part of my life's real ceremony. There was no seating chart, no call for attention, no choreography, just laughter drifting between stories, sunlight falling through the leaves, and the hum of people who knew each other not through obligation, but through the daily, quiet choosing to stay. When it came time for the picture, no one adjusted anyone's posture or asked for a retake. We simply stood the way we always had, beside one another. I was in the center, not because I asked to be, but because that's where they naturally placed me. Not in a position of importance, but of belonging. One arm resting on Chloe's shoulder, one hand held by Lila, a circle, not a line, a moment, not a performance. The photographer didn't say much. He looked through his lens and waited until we stopped posing, until we forgot there was a camera at all. And then, just as the wind picked up the edge of my lace sleeve and the laughter quieted into something peaceful, he clicked the shutter. That was the moment. Not posed, not polished, just honest. And when I saw it later, our faces lit by a truth we didn't need to speak, I knew that frame would last longer than any gold-trimmed album or staged display. It was a picture that didn't need explanation. It simply told the truth. That love, when it's real, doesn't care for show. It roots itself in the ordinary and grows into something worth remembering. About 10 days after that garden afternoon, I was sitting on the porch with a warm mug of tea, the same kind Chloe had brought me during the photo shoot, when the mail slid through the slot. A few bills, a catalog, and tucked between them, the local paper. I almost didn't open it. These days, it's mostly politics and church raffles, and I've never been one to read gossip columns. But something made me flip through it, page by page, until I landed on the weddings and announcements section. Right there at the top corner was my son's name. Thomas Elijah Rivers, married to Marcy Lillian Brooks. Their wedding had made the news, not because of how expensive it was or who attended, but because someone had decided it was worth mentioning. Someone who remembered something deeper. I stared at the headline for a moment before I looked down at the photo. My breath caught. It wasn't the image they had posed for at the fountain. Not the one where I had been asked to step aside. It was ours, the one from the garden, the one with the lace and the lemon cake and the laughter that wasn't practiced. There we were, me in the middle, Chloe beside me, Lila's hand on my shoulder, the older faces of people who had never left my side. No matching dresses, no rented smiles, just warmth, real warmth. And right beneath it, printed in small, steady letters, were the words, family, chosen and cherished. For a moment I just stared. My hands didn't move, my heart didn't race, it simply settled in that strange, quiet peace that only comes when something unjust is made right in the smallest, most unexpected way. I found out later that the editor of the paper was someone I'd taught back in 3rd grade. I hadn't recognized her name in the byline, but she had remembered me. She remembered the way I stayed after school with kids who couldn't read, how I brought in my own books when the shelves were bare, how I sent home notes not when children did wrong, but when they did something quietly kind. She told me, in a message scribbled on the bottom corner of the clipping she later mailed to my house, "You once told me love doesn't need to shout to be heard. I saw your photo, and I heard everything." Thomas and Marcy had sent in their polished picture, the one with the rented fountain and the straight-lined poses. But it never made it to print. That photo stayed wherever they had tucked it away, probably waiting to be framed on a hallway wall no one stops to look at. But mine, the one they never expected, became the one shared in coffee shops and pinned to neighbors' refrigerators. It became the image people smiled at, not because of who we were wearing, but because of what we were holding. And that's the thing. Sometimes, you don't have to push your way into a picture to be seen. Sometimes you just have to let the truth step into the light. Because real family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's who shows up with a chair when no one else saved you a seat. And sometimes it's the photo no one planned that tells the story best. It was the next morning, just after sunrise, when the phone rang. The kind of early call that makes your stomach tighten before you even say hello. I let it ring once more before answering, already knowing who it was. His voice came through sharp, like he had been rehearsing it all night. "Mom, why would you do this?" Not "good morning." Not "how are you?" Just that. I could hear the frustration tangled in his words, the embarrassment pushing against his breath. I didn't speak right away. I let the silence stretch, not to be cruel, but because I needed to hear my own heartbeat before I gave him my answer. When I finally spoke, I didn't raise voice. I didn't meet his anger with more of it. I simply said I didn't make it about me. I just made space for the truth. He sighed, like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words fast enough. He said something about how the paper made it look I was trying to take over, like I had undermined them. I let him finish, every word. I owed him that much. Not because he deserved it in that moment, but because I wanted to remember what it sounded like to love someone who'd forgotten where they came from. He didn't apologize. Not once. Not for leaving me out. Not for looking away when I stepped back from that photo. Not for letting his wife speak what he should have stopped. He just stayed wrapped in his own discomfort, like it was more painful to be embarrassed than to see someone you love hurt. Later that afternoon, I got a message from Marcy. Just a few words, stiff and clipped like the edge of a dinner plate. That was inappropriate. That was all she wrote. Not hello. Not we didn't mean to. Just that. I stared at the screen, reread it 3 times, then closed my phone. I didn't need time to think. I didn't need advice. I just typed my replies slowly, carefully, making sure every word held the weight of all I had held alone. So was asking me to pay for a seat I couldn't sit in. And I sent it. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. But I also didn't feel empty afterward. I felt still. I felt like I had finally drawn a line without raising my voice. A line not in sand but in stone. One that said, without anger, that I would not keep writing checks for a love that no longer returned my letters, that I could be kind without being used, generous without being erased. It's a strange thing when you realize the people you once protected will one day forget they needed protection at all. And maybe that's what hurts the most. Not the forgetting, but the pretending it never happened. I didn't need him to like the photo. I didn't need her approval. I didn't even need their forgiveness. I just needed them to know I saw everything. And that this time, I would not be stepping out of the frame. The funny thing about pictures is that people take them thinking they're capturing something permanent, something proud, something perfect. They frame them, post them, tuck them into albums, hoping to freeze a moment just right. But the truth is, the ones people treasure most are rarely the ones posed for. They're the ones that hold feeling, the ones that breathe. And the photo they posed for that day, the one I was asked to step away from, it never made it to the frame above their fireplace. It never found its way onto social media or into the family album they'll hand down. That image, polished and practiced, stayed exactly where it was saved, on a USB drive, forgotten in the back of a drawer, gathering dust like the moment it was born from. Mine, though. The one from my garden. The one with laughter in it and arms around shoulders that knew real history. That one found a life of its own. Chloe had it printed and framed in walnut wood and gave it to me the following week. It sits on my mantel now, where the afternoon sun catches the corner of the glass just right. That same photo made its way into the paper, clipped by neighbors, pinned to community boards, even brought up at church by people who remembered my kindness long before they ever learned my name. People saw it and said things like, "Now that's what love looks like," or "That feels like home." Not because of how it was taken, but because of what it held. They didn't expect that. They didn't expect the world to see what they had overlooked. Because when you erase someone, you assume their story ends where yours begins. But it doesn't. It never has. It simply takes on a new shape, one that you no longer get to edit. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I didn't beg to be included. I didn't threaten, demand, or destroy. I simply created something better. Something rooted in truth. I gathered the people who had never asked me to prove my worth, and I let the light find us without permission. And in doing so, I wrote my name back into the story without ever needing a pen. Every time I walk past that photo, I don't think about who didn't stand beside me that day. I think about who did. I think about the hands that held mine, the eyes that didn't look past me, and the history behind each smile. I think about how a single moment, built with love, can outlive 1,000 that were built to impress. I wasn't in their frame, but they're still in mine. Because even though they tried to cut me out, I never stopped carrying them. And even now, even with everything, a part of me still hopes they'll one day look back and realize what they lost. Not the money, not the venue, but the quiet, unwavering presence of someone who only ever wanted to stand beside them. Someone who never needed credit, only kindness. Someone who didn't ask for a place in their spotlight, but simply hoped to be included in their shadow. If they've ever made you feel like a visitor in a home you helped build, or asked you to step back from a moment you gave everything to make possible, hear me now. You are not the problem. You are not invisible, and you were never meant to shrink just to keep others comfortable. You don't have to beg for a seat at a table you built, or squeeze into a picture that was never taken with your heart in mind. You can create your own. And when you do, fill it with people who don't need blood to love you, who don't need reminders to remember you, who make space without you having to ask. If you've ever been left out of something you carried on your back for years, tell me below. Or just write, "I'm in the frame now." That's enough. Please subscribe if you've ever had to quietly reclaim your place without asking permission. And if you're watching this alone tonight, this light, it's for you. Thank you for watching.